Welcome to Worthy Mother podcast. Today's conversation is going to be a really interesting one and one that I am very excited to have. I am joined by Dr. Giselle Goodwin, author of the book, Can Women Really Have It All? A Happiness Handbook for Working Mothers. And we are going to be exploring that question. Can women have it all? What does that even mean? And how does happiness fit into the equation? If you have found yourself in motherhood feeling somewhat dissatisfied, like you wish you could just do and be all the things that would bring you joy, but also faced with this reality that it feels like too much to be trying to do that, this one is for you. I know that I can relate to that. That has been definitely something I've come up against. And I know so many moms that I talk to also can relate to that feeling of like not quite feeling satisfied, feeling like maybe the moms they're seeing are doing it all and they can't hang with it, and not sure like what forward movement looks like. Welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hardy, a mom of two on a mission to help moms everywhere feel less alone. This is not a parenting podcast. Instead, it's a space for pushing back against societal expectations of perfection and embracing self-compassion in your motherhood journey. Let's get into it. Dr. Giselle, I'm so excited today to just get into this, really like pull apart what we're talking about, how society's influence impacts us as moms and impacts what we think we should be doing and how we should be feeling and just all of that. So, welcome to Where the Mother podcast. So happy to have you here. Can you go ahead and just like introduce yourself? Tell us about who you are and the work that you do.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Yeah, really happy to chat about this subject, which is one that's really close to my heart. So my area of expertise is women, work, and well-being. And I suppose like so many women out there, we have our own experiences and kind of ways that we've come to this subject matter. I've been thinking about it for a really long time. I've gone and I've done some study in this area. I've interviewed a number of women. And yeah, that's what I'd love to chat about today is a little bit about what I've learned, how we make it work better, how we get some of these issues and challenges that women face, how we get in a better place with it. So in terms of my background, I grew up in Canada. I'm Gen X. I was a child of the 1980s. I grew up in a culture that was very individualistic. We were kind of told like feminism was a done deal. That was kind of fine. Women could have it all. We could balance work and family in the same way as men. You know, my job as a woman, certainly the messages I received growing up was that, I just had to put my big girl knickers on, get in the world of work, make my own way in the world, and not rely on a man to provide financially for me. I could do that for myself. So certainly I grew up with that messaging. I was all bought in. That was definitely how I saw the world. And that worked out really well for me in my 20s. That was fine. I went to university. I worked my way up in the world of work. And it was really only when I became a mother in my early 30s that the wheels came off. And I started to feel like, yeah, none of this is really working for me. So in my 30s, I had a couple of businesses over the years. So I had a recruitment company for 15 years. I had an online pharmacy for a number of years as well. And I had two little girls in my 30s. And by the time I reached 35, I can remember waking up on the morning of my 35th birthday and being like angry, like overwhelmed, and just thinking, I haven't got time to have a birthday today. Like, I haven't got time to have a pee on my own. I haven't got time to wash my hair. I haven't got time to be happy and celebrate a birthday. Like, that's not going to happen today. So I just remember feeling overwhelmed. And a lot of my 30s went like that. And absolutely, as you describe, this idea that I was looking over my shoulder and thinking, how is everybody else seems to manage this? They seem to be doing this better than me. They've either made better choices or they're coping better. Like, what is wrong with me that I cannot seem to get this stuff together? So I definitely remember that feeling, the overwhelm, definitely the like, I'm failing, and always the chronic guilt. That guilt of motherhood, that bit about being like permanently letting people down, being pushed from pillar to post. So that was definitely kind of a theme for me a number of years ago. And then I remember a really clarifying conversation I had about 10 years ago before I really started studying this stuff in detail. And it was a conversation I had with my friend, Fran. And we were sat at my kitchen table putting the world to rights as you do, a little glass of wine. And the children were there. They were having a little tea party under the table, and we were having a good chat. We were talking about all kinds of things, but one of them was a friend of friends who was a hospital doctor. And Fran was saying to me that, this friend of hers was just like absolutely busy, crazy, couldn't kind of manage everything and was finding it really stressful. And she said, Giselle, the thing is, I would never tell my daughter to try and become a doctor. Like, I'd never tell her to do that because, like, it's just ridiculous. By the time you get to be a consultant, your eggs will have dried up. You'll have missed the baby boat. Like, it's just ridiculous. Kind of like she was saying, why would you tell your daughters to strive? Because what's the point? It's too stressful. That was the message. And she said this thing that I never forget because it was just really stuck with me, which was, she said, Giselle, feminism, she said, the whole thing's a lie. She said, like, women are so sick of this idea of having it all because all we're doing is doing it all and we're over it. And I just remember thinking, like, well, she's not wrong
Yeah.
because I remember feeling overwhelmed. Like, I was thinking, this doesn't work for me. This has not added up for me. But like, what's the answer? Like, what do I say to my children? Like, as I say, they were there, they were under the table, they were having this tea party, they were so little. Do you say, honey, don't bother? Like, marry rich, like, whatever, like, don't worry about it. So it really kind of created this push and pull in my mind about how do I make this better? Not only for me, frazzled and frenetic as I was, but for my kids, because
Mm-hmm.
what do I say to them? How do we make this better for them? And so then I was lucky enough in 2018 that I was able to sell both my businesses. So that released some time and space for me. I went back to university and I started doing some writing courses. And so at a few writing conferences, I actually met a wonderful woman who was about 10 years older than me. She was a professor of women and work, was her particular expertise, women entrepreneurs, actually. So she invited me to interview about my work and my businesses. And then she afterwards invited me to do a PhD on the subject. So this is how I've got into this. And I've done a PhD under her supervision in the subject of women, work, and well-being. And one of the things she said to me that just really stuck with me was this idea that, we've got this research now that tells us that women today are less happy than they were 50 years ago. So less
Mm-hmm.
happy, absolutely, less happy in comparison with men. And she said, the thing is, it's not just you. So the message she gave me that I suppose made me feel really relieved was, it's not just you that can't cope. This is the soup we're swimming in. Giselle, it's not you, it's society. There are bigger structural issues at play here. You're taking personal responsibility alone for the idea that you're meant to be able to do this, and it's a bigger issue. So that really stuck with me. And so I have loved this subject. I've loved making it interesting. And this is where my books come from. So I've then, post doing the PhD, written this book, Can Women Really Have It All? And it's vomited up all my kind of thoughts, some really very personal anecdotes in there from me, from lots of other women about their experiences and where we are and why this isn't working, but also, really more importantly, the practical guts of how do we make this better? Because that's what's important, isn't it? How do we get this to be better for our kids?
Yeah. Okay. With all of that you just shared and the kind of inspiration behind getting into this work, it just brings up how complex and complicated it all is when we're talking about progress for women. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's something we have to talk about because something that I'm kind of hearing is almost like, are we in kind of a growing pains sort of thing, right? There's women are able to do things that historically we weren't able to do in society. And yet the expectations of what women should be doing are like at an all-time high of like, it's not just these new things of like, you can have a badass career and do whatever you want, but also like
Yeah,
you have to be everything that women have been expected to be historically. And that still maybe is progress. It still is progress. Like I'll say that. I think it still is progress. I believe
it
feminism
is.
is real. We
Yes.
are making progress. But it also, like you say, women are not as happy. Like the happiness has declined,
Mm.
and compared to men, it's declined. And it's just like when you wrap your mind around it, it's like, okay, yeah, what is the way forward as individuals, but like as a society too? And where do we put the effort? Is it in this societal factors or is it in me as an individual? And I think the answer is probably both, right? There's things we can do as an individual, but
Mm.
knowing that it's not an individual problem is also really important because it takes some of that pressure off to feel like there's something wrong with me for all of this, for feeling like I can't have it all or I want it all or whatever, right?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
It's massive. So I think exactly as you're saying, the context of it is really important. So if
Hmm.
we contextualize where we've come from in terms of where we were and where we are now, what we're not saying is that we want to go backwards, right? So we're not saying that. So as much as I say, that was the conversation I had with my friend, and I was like, well, yeah, maybe, maybe this doesn't work. Maybe we were happier before. We weren't. Women had
Hmm.
less choice. They didn't have control over their own financial affairs. We have to think about how far we've come in such a short evolutionary space of time. Like, it's minuscule. So the last 100 years for women, right? We couldn't vote 100 years ago. In 1975, we couldn't have our own mortgages or credit cards. Control that women have over their own bodies, all those types of things. Things have changed, but we're just not there yet. So we're going in a direction, but it's changed so quickly that nobody's caught up. Men and women haven't caught up.
Yeah.
So we're now in the workforce. So, if we think 100 years ago, it was 25% of women worked outside of the home. Now it's 75% of women work outside the home compared with 92% of men. So it's changed in a really short period of time, and nobody's really caught up in terms of what these different roles are. So the reason women are massively stressed out is we have double jobs. We talk about the second shift, right? We have the work inside the home and the work outside the home. And the researchers have been talking a lot since the turn of the century about this idea that women have a new sexual contract with society. So 100 years ago, the idea was, your job as a woman was to fulfill your reproductive destiny and become a mother, right? Now, what we say is actually, and societal surveys back this up, what we expect of women is not only to be the primary caregiver for children and the self sacrificing primary caregiver for children, but also we expect women to provide financially for our children. So women are in this double bind. Like, you stay home with children, we're like, oh, lazy mother. You go out to work, they're like, oh, shame you couldn't make Johnny's rehearsal. So you're caught between this rock and a hard place. So the researchers say this unhappiness situation is to do with women's expectations being raised. Me being
Yeah.
told in the 1980s, like, it's a done deal. As I say, tie-dye t-shirts, girls can do anything. And actually, our reality is not caught up with that. We are just not there yet.
Yeah.
Yet being the operative word. We're not there yet. And we need to keep pushing. We need to keep pushing to make it better.
Yeah. There's like these little pieces coming to me as you're saying that. So many thoughts. One is when you contextualize things like this, it makes sense why this whole like trad wife romanticizing thing has come to be. And there's so much I could say on that of like, yes, it's romanticizing something that was not like that and like whatever. But it makes sense like when women are faced with like the expectation to do and be it all, like pushing back on that in different ways.
We go,
That's
no
not the
thanks.
way, right? Yeah, it's like that's not
Absolutely.
the
We
way
go, no
we're
thanks.
pushing.
Mm,
Totally. Because
mm.
it's impossible either way. Like it's impossible to do and have it all, which we're obviously going to get into. But like then another thing that's coming to mind is just how the workplace has not changed. Like the workplace is the way it's been for however long it's been that way, right? Like for the last 100 years, we've had the same type of work week, the same type of work days. Obviously, with the pandemic, there has been shifts, and with online work, like we are seeing shifts now, but it's like women weren't built into that. That model is not something that reflects what is now expected of women, and it just is overwhelming. It's like you can't do it all. You can't quote have it all because we don't even know what that looks like. We don't even know what that should feel like. It's never been done before, right? Like it's so new and I think thinking about how things the world hasn't caught up to where we are. to where we have fought to be. When you think about that, like there's kind of this duality of like that's empowering and also a little bit like hopeless. I don't know, hopeless probably isn't the right word, but just it feels so dreary. Like, well, I can't change that, right? So, how do you kind of see the best way forward in that?
Yeah, okay. So absolutely right. There's two things at play here. There's
Hmm.
the societal constructs and work and all the rest of it. And then there's the stuff we can do as individuals.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I talk about in the book. I take it a two phase approach, really. So in terms of what we need from society, we absolutely need more gender equality. And we can talk about that in a bit more detail. But in terms of what that looks like in the workplace, it's three primary things. We need better flexible working, and we need flexible working for all. We
Yeah.
don't need just women to be siloed at home and men out to the office to do the networking and all the rest of it. So flexible working has to work for parents in general, not just mothers. We need good childcare provision. You know, we do a little bit better here in Europe on that than you do in America. And we need governmental support in terms of paid childcare. You know, and again, this is how societies are functioning now. So gone are the days where you had family around the corner. You know, people move away from family, you don't have grandparent support, all the rest of it. So we're living in these nuclear family silos and we're so isolated. And that 24/7 hour a day, like that job of being a parent is so intense. It's so intense. We need help. So when I say childcare, again, I don't mean farm baby out at seconds old and have somebody else look after them 24/7. I mean, we need support, really good, high quality childcare within community based networks. That needs to be structural. And, you know, governments seem to find the money to put into massive infrastructure projects. But actually, the most important resource we have is the next generation, our children. And the childcare and the support structures that we need for them are absolutely crucial. And then really good paid parental leave for both mothers and fathers to be flexibly taken up until the point where that child has had a really good grounding for life. And so we need to be supporting families much more than we are doing. This idea that, you know, that's an individual's decision about having children. If everybody stopped having children, which by the way, many women are now in developed countries, they're going, I don't quite fancy it under the current circumstances,
Yeah.
thanks. If we stopped, I think life doesn't go on, does it? So we need to prioritize this. And as long as women keep kind of, you know, well, we'll just suck it up. That's what we're meant to do. We just get on with it. Yeah, it won't change. So societally, though, we need those three things. Then in terms of individual kind of ways to create more well-being, I have a mnemonic that I talk about in the book. It's under Empower Life. So I've got lots of different things that I talk through in terms of things about expecting less of ourselves,
Yeah.
asking for more from others, delegating, boundary setting, letting go of that guilt, considering portfolio careers. I go through quite a few different things as well, because I just think that, and I know you talk about this a lot, women are lacking the self-compassion and care for ourselves. We are society's caregivers,
Yeah.
and we end up, and certainly I'm experiencing this a lot with my midlife friends, on empty. We end up after so many years of caregiving on empty, and we just can't do it. So there needs to be, we need to be supporting ourselves with this, and society needs to support us too.
There's so much in there. Again, everything that you're saying is just so, it's so present and real, I think, for me and so many moms that I talk to that it's
Yeah.
like I have so many things I want to kind of latch onto. One thing I do want to point out is how you said that with societal changes and changes in the workplace, it's important that these things are not just accommodating for mothers. And I think that's a really key piece. Obviously, like, yes, mothers should have leave and should have paid leave and should
Yes,
be supported and have the
absolutely.
flexibility to be able to do what they need to do as a parent while also doing their job well. But I think sometimes we leave out the fact that in talking about the need for that for mothers, we are differing. We're saying that like this is a woman's responsibility. They should be the ones doing it all. They should be the ones who have the responsibility of being a great mom, a great parent, and being great at their job. And so really making this a problem for everyone, moms
Yes.
and dads, saying both. Like we need to be able to give parents the flexibility to be flexibility might not even be quite the right word, but like we need to empower them to be
Support.
yeah, the support to be great parents and great at their jobs. And like it's possible. Like there are a lot of parents out there who are great parents and great at their jobs, but it really does require like a foundation of support and a structure that like makes sense to be able to do that, to be great at those things and not also be like burning the fuse because a lot of times it's like you're just making decisions on where to put your energy and there's no energy left. So I think that's a really key piece to the conversation is like this is something that if we can reframe that and reframe this as a problem that doesn't just belong to mothers, I think the progress can be much greater and much more like all encompassing. It really can start to change some of those dynamics even within the home when men are also
For
empowered to be
sure.
good parents, right? Like they're empowered
And
to
and
do more.
we know this. We know that men are so important for child raising. We know how important father care is for children, how it increases educational outcomes. We know how important fathers are. And so yeah, it does fathers a massive disservice to treat them like second-class
Yeah.
citizens or backup parents. So we want fathers involved. And as I say, the other thing I'm really conscious of is that, 85% of
Yes.
single parents are mothers, right? So, this is not to say that you have to have fathers there, but we have to have a support structure that involves other caregivers than the burnt out, harried, harassed, single, on her own, doing everything mother. And, there's some great work that anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hardy does on allo parenting. I don't know if you've come across
I'm
those
not familiar
concepts
with that.
before. So she talks about this idea, again, through anthropology and our history, how we've evolved in societies where we had multiple caregivers. So it wasn't just down to the infinite resources of one mother to look after children. Children were passed around different caregivers. And the idea was that the different caregivers that they had, and it could be aunts or uncles or whoever, but they gave them all different things. So the children learned different things from forming strong attachments with different caregivers. And this was a great way. This is how we evolved. This is kind of in our evolutionary history, so it just doesn't make sense to put it all on burned out mothers. And it does, society needs to change. And if we're going to prioritize families, it needs to take everyone into account. And I think the conversations would be less fraught then. I think they would be less me and you and this,
Yeah.
this gender like, I don't like those conversations where you go like, feminism means women are up and men are down. And it's really, we need to be having more collaboration. So again, the research consistently shows that in societies where there is greater gender equality, both men and women are happier. So gender equality benefits everyone. We're not
Yeah.
talking a win-lose situation, we're talking a win-win. Fathers get to be better present parents. There's again some more great research, which is it's a lady called Bronnie Ware who wrote a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And she talks about one of men's main regrets is this idea that they worked too hard and they should have spent more time with their loved ones. Many men want this, and we find that it's the millennial generation typically, which is the midpoint for this change. So we're moving in that direction of having more men saying, actually, I also want both. I
Yeah.
want time with my family and I want time to fulfill my own pursuits and my own career, but we're not there yet. And as we see in all movements, all social movements, feminism is like the backwards motion of the tide. We're taking 2 steps forward, then we have a little backlash. 2 steps forward, we have a little backlash. And I think we're living through a backlash at the moment, but we're not getting back in the box. We've made too much progress now. And it's phenomenal the progress we've made, as I say, in the last 100 years. If we think about how women's lives were 150 years ago, so much different to what we are today. So all we can do is keep pushing and hoping for more change.
Yeah. Well, and I think just thinking about that, so many women right now were raised by women who were working and raising children to some extent, right? And so
Yes.
while there may be backlash, the reality is also that many of us are like grew up in a world where it was expected that both our parents would be working,
Yeah.
or we knew people who had both parents working, or whatever it is. So that's hopeful because it's like, yeah, we're not going
We
back
are
to a place that
changing.
we've never seen. Yes, and it's
Yeah.
powerful to think about that. I want to shift a little bit into talking about happiness and fulfilledness because I think that that is a huge piece of the conversation when it comes to like why moms might even be listening to a podcast like this in the first place. It's kind of
Mm.
this face up with the idea that like I kind of thought motherhood would be what fulfilled me, or maybe I knew that it wasn't going to be all fulfilling, and I have this career that's really empowering and I love what I do, and I thought I could balance that and having a kid and that I would just be happy, but I'm really just overwhelmed. Like all these kind of questionings about what happiness is and what I should be expecting from life because this ain't it, right? Like I think that's really something that a lot of moms face, and that's what gets them into the world of like learning about this. So I'm curious if you can just explain for us what is happiness? Like what are the things that we as humans look for to be happy? What does that mean? Like that concept literally can feel so foreign.
Yes, absolutely. It's a great question. Okay, so when we look at what the academics say about what happiness is, they define it as a combination of pleasure and purpose. So the academic terms for it are pleasure is hedonia and purpose is eudaimonia. And so eudaimonia is a concept that's been around a really long time. It goes back to, Aristotle talks about this idea of eudaimonia. And he kind of describes it as something a bit more encompassing than just purpose. He says it's about living a life that's true to our sense of self, our values, our virtues. It's kind of a bigger, more meaningful part of
Mhm.
our life. So what we need is a sense of pleasure and purpose. These are two things. Now the purpose can be children, it can be work, it can be your hobbies, it's something that's very unique and specific to you, but it tends to be work related and action related. Pleasure again is very unique to you as well, but a lot of the pleasure stuff takes a nosedive when we become parents because we end up with a lot less time, right? So motherhood by definition in today's society, we also talk about this cult of intensive mothering stuff, don't we? So motherhood is a very self-sacrificing role. And so when it comes to the pleasurable aspects of well-being, they can take a nosedive when you first become a parent. And that's quite significant. And this is one of the things I unpick in my book is kind of this distinction between what the generic happiness advice in the wellness industry tells us about well-being and actually how this relates to working mothers. So in terms of generic advice, again, some other things we know about well-being are that a certain proportion of it is genetic. So we know it's related to this specific gene called the 5-HTT gene. So that particular gene, if you happen to have a longer or shorter version of it, makes you predisposed to being a little bit more Tigger or a little bit more Eeyore. So we know that, again, depending on the study you look at, either 30 to 50% of happiness can be genetic. But what we also know is that a really big chunk of our happiness is dependent on our behaviors. And there's certain behaviors that we can implement in our own lives to make ourselves happier. So that's really good news. There are things we can actively do. And probably the things I'll describe to you won't surprise you. Your Instagram feed is probably full of them. So it's things like connecting with people, doing exercise, taking care of your body, living life mindfully, trying new things, being resilient, looking for ways to bounce back. So there's lots of different things that generic happiness advice gives us, right? And I unpick quite a few of these, but I also argue that a number of them look different for mothers, and particularly working mothers who have very little time. So, we know that working mothers are up to 40% more stressed than women without children and are up to 28% more likely to burn out than working fathers. So because we struggle with these time pressures, I kind of unpick these happiness habits and talk about things like, for instance, this random acts of kindness. Many mothers I know before 9 a.m. on a school day have done several random acts of kindness for various people in their families. So there's such a thing as burnout for working mothers. We also know when it comes to mothers that we're the demographic with the least time to exercise, eat well, look after our bodies. So again, we know these things, but in terms of practical ways of actually implementing some of this stuff, I think we need to look at it slightly differently. So yeah, those are also some of the things I go into in terms of what are the micro things you can do for yourself to give you that added boost of pleasure. Because I do think that when it comes to women's well-being, a lot of it is wrapped up in this business of mother's self-sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember really well an incident I had with my children when they were very little, and I used to take them swimming. And you know what it's like getting them in and out of the swimming pool, and everybody's cold and wet and slippery and all the rest of it. And I remember getting changed one day after swimming, and I'm there like shoving my legs into my wet jeans and, trying to get ready. And I was getting ready first before my children. And there was another mum in the changing room, and she saw my little girl there, and she basically scooped my little girl out, one of them, wrapped her in a big towel, and handed me this bundle of arms and legs and said, I couldn't bear to see her cold.
Mm-hmm.
And Emily, like, for me, that just encapsulates, the shame I felt,
Yeah.
the shame that I had got myself dressed first before I got the children dressed. So we live with that as mothers. We live with this idea because society tells us two things. They tell us in one breath, your children should come first. And then they tell us in the other breath, stop being so silly and stop being a martyr. You're overthinking that. And we are just stuck between this rock and a hard place of overgiving. That's what we're meant to be doing, and putting ourselves very last at the bottom of the queue, or like the guilt and the pressure of, well, you're not doing that right. So it's very, very, it's a big thing to try and cope with. And it's very, very unique to mothers, I think. And it's definitely a societal pressure. So I do try and go through some more micro moments and ways of coping with this that can make it better.
Yeah, that situation, I'm just like, ugh. Like my heart hurts for you in that moment because of how just ridiculous it is of like you're not neglecting your kid. Like it's and I think all of us have had experiences like that where it's like somebody says something that's like this greater societal message that we're constantly getting and it's like oh my God, I did that wrong. I'm selfish. I don't like all the things that flood in. And we've all experienced that because there's people say things like that. People feel emboldened to like I don't even think they think that's criticizing moms. It's just
No,
like,
it wasn't, there was
yeah,
no malice even in
yeah,
what she said. She thought, I think in her head she was being helpful. So,
yeah,
you could unpick that in all kinds of ways, but certainly because of the societal messaging I received, that idea, as I say, it was
yeah,
shame. It was the shame I
yes,
should not have put myself first. I was cold, they were cold, I got dressed first. It was, yeah. Yeah, but you
yeah,
should not. A good mother does not do that. You do your children first.
yeah,
Everything should come with your children first. And women end up burned out
yeah,
because of that behavior. They end up
yes,
burned out. So we cannot give from empty cups. We can't, you can't pour from an empty cup. And we need to get better at rationalizing this, recognizing this, supporting each other with this. Yeah, it's a tough one.
yeah. Well, and when you're listening to conversations like this and then something happens it like that, you come to it a little bit differently of like, okay, I know that I don't have to I mean, you might still go to a place of like complete mom guilt, shame, but you have more information behind that. You have a different context of like societal messaging. It's okay if I do things for myself. Like, I know that that's important. I don't always have to put my child first with everything. Like, it does make a difference when you are changing the input, when you're changing what you're bringing in. I also just, as you're speaking about the things that kind of keep moms from being able to, I don't want to say keep moms from being able to achieve happiness, but that can kind of be roadblocks in that when we think about the kind of typical advice out there. Right before we hit record, we were talking about my separation and how this morning
Yeah.
I walked the dog and had a pretty easy morning and didn't have the kids. And something that I've been really interested looking at because it's been months now that I'm 50-50 custody with my kids and trust my, their dad with them. And, it's there's still things where I'm like, this is interesting how I'm still taking on the load in certain things. Like, for sure, that's definitely happening. However, with our time, it's been 50-50. And I have felt so happy in life. And I think there's a lot behind that, right? There's a relationship that ended that was, it was impacting both of our happiness as it was going. So there's a lot behind that. It's not just that I don't have my kids 50% of the time. And obviously there's a lot of like sadness in not having my kids 50% of the time. But I have had so much more space to be able to do the things like you're saying, the exercise. Like I am walking my dog every day, which was not the reality when the kids were here every day. And I was like the primary parent who had them all the time. I have been focused a lot more on my career and the work that I do. I have been helping others in ways that, like,
Yes.
when I have my kids every single day and I'm constantly doing things for them I can't do. And I think it's something that I am exploring and trying to understand for myself. Like, where is this joy coming from? Because I love my life right now, despite like some really hard situations. I'm happy. And so I think it's cool like hearing that. And I want to say that obviously that's not like oh, divorce is great. And like, if you just have 50-50 custody, you'll be happy. But it's interesting. Like, I'm like, yep, I believe you. I believe everything you're saying because I'm seeing
Yeah.
it.
So yeah, as you're talking there, few things come to my mind. One, I wonder, do you feel if you're a better mother for having more time and being more
Well,
fulfilled in yourself?
yes, and something
Yeah.
I talk a lot about like mom rage on this podcast because that's something that
Yep.
I struggled with so much, especially after the birth of my second son. I struggled with my first son. I was very overstimulated and like it was really it's been a work in progress getting to a place where I can self-regulate. And uh, I am so not perfect at it. It's something that I will probably always be working on. But my
None of us
kid
are.
knocked over a pot the other day and like broke this. It's like my favorite pot. I mean, it was a cheap flower pot, but I loved it and I can't replace it. He knocked it off the mantle doing something I told him to stop doing, and it broke. And I felt that like urge to like yell and then didn't. And I didn't do anything. I just like took a breath and then like was like, I'm gonna have to
But
deal with this either way.
yeah, your own cup was
Yes.
full. You were not running on empty. So yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. So number one, you had more time. And that was one of the things I would love to unpick with you as well. So
Yeah.
we talk about the difference in terms of well-being for mothers and fathers. And there's a few different ways that differs. So one is time, another is good relationships, and a third is money. And when you're talking there about good relationships, again, there's really good evidence that backs this up. That exactly as you say, it's not like, right, get divorced, split your kids 50-50 and the world will be a better place. No, but what we do know is that good relationships are absolutely fundamental to our well being. So, research study after research study tells us that we are wired for connection and we need good relationships with others. And so, if you have a toxic relationship or a relationship, particularly your primary attachment relationship, if that is not working for you, that has a massive detriment to your happiness. And really, until that gets in order, we can do all the deep breathing, all the journaling, all the
Hmm.
gratitude practices, all the, I don't know, underwater swimming, whatever. And actually, that is just tinkering around the edges. So, a really fundamental truth is that good relationships are absolutely key to our well being. And what's different in terms of how they look for women and men is that we know that good relationships promote longevity and well-being. And so that we know that men's well-being is protected in terms of them being married or not. And we know that women's well-being and longevity is protected by the quality of their relationships with other women.
Yeah.
So those studies show that. And we also know that if you take four categories, married men, married women, and single women, we know that married men are the happiest category and single men are the least happy category. And as I say, that married women fit there somewhere in the middle. And we also know that topping the happiness charts nowadays are single women with no children. So it's really very interesting, isn't it, how some of these gender dynamics are playing out. And the researchers are talking about this idea that it's to do with women's caregiving role in society. So, because we are spending so much of our emotional energy, so you alluded earlier to the emotional load as well, we're spending so much of our time with this giving,
Mm-hmm.
we end up spent. And if we could pour a little bit of that back into ourselves, it improves our happiness, so much more. So as I say, good relationships are absolutely key. So what you're saying to me makes perfect sense. And then the other two things, the time and the money is really interesting as well, right? So what you're saying is you're being able to focus on your work more and you have more time to walk your dog and things like that. So those are two other areas where mothers and fathers' well-being typically differ. So in terms of whether we need money for happiness, that old adage is true, right? So
Mm-hmm.
money doesn't make you happy, but it does give you choices.
Yeah.
It does. And we don't need to be millionaires to be happy, but we need to not be living in poverty. Our spending must not exceed our income. So, money is definitely important for well being and having a certain baseline of safety, security, and autonomy. So, what money does is it buys us choice. And choice that, as I say, we were talking about the history of how we've got here, that we never used to have.
Mm-hmm.
We're still not at equality when it comes to money, so we know that when women become mothers, that their pay drops by 60% in the first 10 years after they've had children, and they never recover that pay penalty.
Yeah.
We know that there's a 15% pay gap, a 20% investment gap, a 38% pension gap. So we know that women are typically poorer than men. So women in general have less money than men. Women in general have less time than men. So, when we talk about this business of the domestic load, fewer than 7% of couples, that was a recent study, split the domestic load evenly. And when they look at these time use studies for couples in heterosexual relationships, if you weigh up unpaid work inside the home and paid work outside the home in time use studies, what we find is that women are typically spending between half an hour to an hour more each day on total work. So that's the
Yeah.
additional of work inside and outside the home. So that adds up, if you extrapolate, to 2.5 years of a woman's life. In the global south, they say that number is 4 years of a woman's life. So
Yeah.
these are years of our lives that we're spending. And those studies, I have to be really specific about this. As I say, it's half an hour to an hour, depending on the study, but it's very consistent that the data is there. And it's just work inside and outside the home. It doesn't include the emotional load, the mental load, right? Which again, you talked about.
Yeah.
And it doesn't include what I call women's third job, which I again discuss quite a lot in my book, which is the idea that women, females, have a third job, which is the work of living in a female body. So we have all kinds of labor requirements when it comes to literal labor,
Wow.
pregnancy, breastfeeding, periods, menopause. We know that women spend up to 25% of their lives in greater ill health than men. There's this beauty pressure as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the plucking, the waxing, the dyeing, all those things. And we can argue that women don't have to do that. And what was really interesting in my research is I interviewed a lot of women about this. And women tended to have three reactions to this kind of beauty pressure that women are under. They either kind of were like, yeah, I really enjoy doing my nails, doing my hair. It's part of what makes me feminine. I enjoy that. That's how I do self-care. They had the reaction, which was, oh, well, I feel under pressure too, because everybody else is getting Botox. Maybe I need to. Or they're like, yeah, whatever, I'll go gray. I don't care.
Yeah.
But my argument is, regardless of your reaction to that societal pressure, any reaction you have still creates work. So you can decide not to do it, but you're still battling against societal norms.
Yeah.
You can decide to do it, but you're still spending hours a day on the blow dry and the waxing and the whatever. So it does create labor. And as I say, I do it under 4 categories. So this work of living in a female body, for me, comes under the categories of biology, beauty, safety, and sex. So in terms of women's workload, there's quite a lot to it.
I've never heard that said quite like that. Like that's the third job. And it's like, yes, like, yes. In all
Mm.
the 4 categories, it's like, yes, it's really remarkable how you laid that out and just the way, like, I think probably anyone listening can relate to at least some of that, right? Like, you may not, you're like, no, that's not
Hmm.
true for me. And it probably is. It probably, you probably are working. I think that piece about like beauty standards, whether you are going with it or not, it's
It's
labor.
still happening to you. It's
Yeah.
still labor. It's the soup you are swimming in that you have to
Yes.
make a decision around how am I dealing with this
Hmm.
piece of it? And
And there's
what does that
the
mean in terms of my place in the world?
totally, there's the emotional load that comes with that too, of like you may not constantly be thinking about it, but it's something that you know what you are, quote, supposed to be doing. Like
The
it's always
should do's,
there. Yes, it's
the
always
should do
there.
list. Not
Yeah.
the, well, there's the to do list and the should do list, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's two of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Really,
Hmm.
that's a, I'm gonna take that with me because that's a pretty remarkable, like, just kind of aha that I just had when you're saying that. So we're talking about these things and how there is so much from society, but there also is like the personal responsibility we have to like make our lives what we want our lives to be. And I'm wondering if you can just maybe leave us with some ways that moms who feel like maybe it's all too much or feel like they want something different, what they can do now to kind of attain that happiness, because we deserve to be happy.
We do. We do. We absolutely do. And I think for mums, if I was to boil it down to one nugget, we talked
Yeah.
about this pleasure and purpose. I think, and I know you talk a lot about this in your podcast, it's about self compassion and self care. So if I was to rewind it all back, I would say, let's look for those moments of pleasure. And in terms of, as I say, our feeds and all this bombardment we have about being happy, sometimes I think from others, this business about being happy ends up as just another flipping thing to do on your to do
Yeah.
list. So for me, it's really important that it's not like, right, I'm saying to you, create a wonderful new exercise regime. I'm saying to you, study mindfulness. Those things are wonderful. They're absolutely on the list. But I think my little take home things would be very, very simple. These just little micro moments you could create for yourself, or just one thing that you could change. So, for instance, if I was to give you, say, 3 tips, one would be set a bare minimum self care rule, right? So actually just set a rule with yourself. It can be something very, very small. So it could be, I'm going to have a cup of coffee on my own every morning for 5 minutes, and nobody's allowed to interrupt me during that, full stop. I mean, good luck with that. But that could be one of them. It could be, I'm not answering emails after 8 o'clock at night. That's it. So, but just a bare minimum, that is it. That is me. Bump. Done. It's the end of it. You could do that today. Number 2, delegate one task without guilt. Yeah. And so I'm rubbish at setting boundaries, absolutely rubbish. I'm still working on it. And the really interesting thing is I've studied this a lot about the push and pull of the boundaries. It's the bit about dealing with the guilt of saying no rather than that resentment of saying yes. And the
Hmm.
resentment builds, doesn't it? The resentment builds over time and it festers. But really, we've got to like rip off that plaster and just go, right, no, that's fine. I'm going to just delegate and somebody else can do that. There's a professor called Cassie Holmes, and I love her work. She talks about how we optimize our time. And she says you have to optimize your time for happiness. So really think about what you do during the week and what things bring you joy and what things don't. So in terms of all the things on your to-do list, do you enjoy dealing with a post or walking the dog? Which of those jobs is better suited to you? And choose the jobs that you enjoy and delegate some of the others. So, again, my other thing that you could do today is delegate one task on your list, delegate it wholeheartedly, that's somebody else's responsibility in the house, delegate it without guilt, and just go, that's not on my list anymore. That's it. That's it. And just don't do it. And then my third thing is practice micro joy moments. So again, we have a lot of talk about mindfulness, which is wonderful, but mindfulness needs a practice, which is a way to calm your head through your thoughts, isn't it?
Hmm.
And I think sometimes what's an easier thing to do is calm it through your actions. So rather than, again, wrestling with your head about, oh, I should be more mindful, I should be thinking like this, but I'm not thinking about that. It's like, anything you tell yourself not to think about, you then think about. If you do these micro joy moments as actions, so like buy yourself a fancy cup of coffee just because, or as you're making dinner or doing the dishes, put a song on that you really like and dance around the kitchen. So just find those glimmers, those little glimmers in every day, but make them physically actionable
Yeah.
glimmers, as opposed to that, like, as I say, mindfulness is wonderful as well. But I think sometimes when we're stuck in overwhelm, we need our bodies to be able to respond physiologically for our minds to then catch up.
Yeah. I think that's a good reframe for mindfulness too, just in general, of like mindfulness is about being present in the moment. And if you can do something that brings you the type of joy that allows you to be present in that joy, and you know the thing. So you're having a really amazing conversation with a friend and you're just like in it, or you are I don't know. There's so many things that you could do, like a hobby that you really like to do. Maybe you're painting and you're just like, you get kind of wrapped up in what you're doing. It's like that is mindfulness. And so often it's
That
presented as something
flow.
like the thing that you do is the mindfulness, like mindfulness
Yes.
is the action. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
really, there's a lot of ways to get there. And sometimes that's the best way, but sometimes it really is like doing
It
something that
starts
takes you
it
in.
starts with a do. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Sometimes you can make it start with a do than a thought. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a lot in this conversation. We've talked about a lot of like big things and then also more like tangible in your own individual life things. And I want to kind of give you the opportunity to leave us with something that if there's like one thing maybe that we walk away from this episode with, or just an additional thing, what that would be, what message you want to leave listeners with.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that really helped me in terms of this guilt, as I say,
Hmm.
85% of mothers feel this chronic guilt. One thing that helped me let go of the guilt was this idea of finding out that actually work makes women happy. So we know that when mothers go out to work, they experience less sadness, anger, depression, and worry. We know, again, as this combination of pleasure and purpose, we know that work is purposeful. It increases our well-being. It not only helps us financially, it helps us socially. It gives us an activity that we enjoy, hoping that we enjoy our work. So work is a good thing, and it kind of feeds into this business around, happy mum is happy child. And so this idea that me working is not only good for me but good therefore for my family, that really helped me let go of this guilt. And the researchers talk about the reason for this is something they call the enrichment theory. So the enrichment theory is this concept that if we put all our eggs in one basket, we're kind of leaving ourselves exposed. Whereas if we have lots of different aspects to our identity, different interests, hobbies, work, family, lots of different things, it leads to a more fulfilling, rich life and is very protective for well-being. So that did help me. It helped me let go of the guilt around that I
Yeah.
felt around work. Yeah.
Yeah, when you can kind of tie the purpose of things to, I'm not just doing this because I want to do it. I'm doing it because it's good for
Good for me
everybody. Yeah.
and good for my family. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Therefore, yeah.
That really can
Yeah.
be such a powerful,
Yeah.
anything we can reframe to understand how it benefits our family, I think is great. And it's not something you have to do. Like you can do things for yourself. I'm a huge proponent of like do it for yourself, but if it
Mm.
helps to think about how it helps your family, like do it for that. Cool. Same
Yes,
impact. Same
exactly
impact.
that. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, exactly that.
So, as we end this conversation, my favorite thing to ask at the end of the conversation to all my guests is about self-care. And I know we have gotten into a lot about how moms can really make sure that they are caring for themselves and doing what they need to do to find that pleasure and enjoyment
Mm.
in life with all the other factors that we've talked about. But I would love to just ask how you take care of yourself and if there's any just additional tips for moms to make sure that they are also caring for themselves regularly.
Yeah. One thing that I do is walking. So I've never been, I alluded earlier to this idea that we all feel we should be doing exercise. And I always used to feel that if I wasn't going for a run or I wasn't down the gym, it didn't really count. And there's lots of great evidence now that walking is so beneficial for our health, so good for us. We know in particular that walking in nature, we see these fractals, they call them, these repeating patterns in nature are very calming for our immune systems. Walking with friends, I often do, that increases oxytocin. So, your love feel good hormone. So, walking in nature with friends is something that, that's a really big thing for me. And what I also say to my kids as well, is you have to keep looking for the thing that's right for you. So as I
Mhm.
say, I used to do different types of exercise and think, oh, like I should, it feels like a chore. But if you can find something that speaks to you, that makes you happy, so it might not be walking, it might be dancing in the kitchen, I don't know, but something that makes you move your body, that feels good to you, any type of habit you pick up, if it's the right one for you, you'll persist with it.
Okay, where can listeners connect with you? Where can they find your book? How can they, I don't know, get in your world?
Okay, so I would love it if they would get in my world. You can find me on my website, gisellegoodwin.com. All my socials are on there. I'm on Instagram at Giselle Goodwin Writes. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook at Dr. Giselle Goodwin. If you go to my website, gisellegoodwin.com, you can download a free personalized happiness manifesto and sign up to my newsletter there as well. So that would be great. And in terms of my book, Can Women Really Have It All? You can find that on Amazon and Audible as well. If you want to listen to more of me, I'm on Audible.
Amazing. Thank you so much. What an incredible conversation. What just wonderful takeaways. I think this one is something that anyone listening, there might be some things in here that can be fairly life-changing if you really can just grasp on to understanding the role of society in our individual experiences as mothers and what we can do about that and maybe what we can't do about that. Like I think it's both of those things can be huge in giving us better experiences in motherhood and in life. So incredible.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. Awareness is key, isn't it? Such a
Yes.
pleasure to chat to you. Really, really
Yes.
enjoyed that conversation. Thank you, Emily. It's been lovely.
Yes. And thank you for tuning in. I will see you next week. You are worthy, Mama.